The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone plaza in front of Buckingham Palace. Tourists gathered in clusters, cameras ready, hoping to catch a glimpse of the famous guards in their red uniforms and tall bearskin hats. Among the crowd stood Marcus, a royal guard who had served for 7 years. His face remained expressionless, his posture perfect, as he had been trained. He stood like a statue, rifle at his side, eyes forward. Despite the chaos of excited visitors around him, Karen Mitchell had arrived in London 3 days ago with her family. She was a woman in her mid-40s who always believed she deserved special treatment wherever she went. Her blonde hair was styled perfectly, her designer sunglasses perched on her head, and her expensive handbag swung from her arm as she walked. Her husband Tom followed behind her, looking tired and embarrassed as usual. Their 2 teenage children, Sophie and Jake, walked even farther behind, both staring at their phones, trying to pretend they were not related to their mother. Karen had been complaining since breakfast. The hotel room was too small. The coffee was too weak. The streets were too crowded. Now, as she approached the palace, she was eating a large chocolate ice cream cone that was melting faster than she could lick it. Sticky brown streams ran down her fingers and dripped onto the ground. She did not care. She was too busy taking selfies and barking orders at her family. Marcus noticed her approaching from the corner of his eye. Years of training had taught him to be aware of everything around him without moving his head. He had seen thousands of tourists like her, people who thought the rules did not apply to them. People who forgot that guards were real human beings doing a difficult job. He remained still, breathing steadily, focused on his duty. Karen walked closer to Marcus, still holding her melting ice cream. She wanted the perfect photo, the kind that would get hundreds of likes on social media. She positioned herself right in front of him, so close that Marcus could smell her strong perfume mixed with chocolate. She posed with a big smile, making peace signs with her sticky fingers, while Tom reluctantly took photos with her phone, but Karen was not satisfied. She moved even closer, trying different angles, completely ignoring the ropes and signs that clearly marked where tourists should not go. A security officer nearby called out to her politely, asking her to step back behind the designated line. Karen turned and glared at him, rolling her eyes dramatically. She continued posing, and as she moved, the ice cream cone tilted dangerously in her hand. Before she could catch it, a large glob of chocolate ice cream fell directly onto the ground, splattering close to Marcus's perfectly polished black boots. Karen looked down at the mess, then at Marcus, then shrugged as if it meant nothing. She did not apologize. She did not try to clean it. She simply laughed and said loudly to Tom that these guards probably stood in worse things all day anyway. Sophie groaned from several feet away, mortified by her mother's behavior. Jake turned his back completely, pretending to film the palace architecture. Tom mumbled something about moving on to the next attraction, but Karen was not finished. She was still eating what remained of her cone, still taking photos, still acting as if she owned the place. Another tourist, an elderly woman from Japan, politely asked Karen if she could move slightly so others could also take photos with the guard. Karen spun around with an annoyed expression and told her to wait her turn. The elderly woman bowed apologetically and stepped back, embarrassed. Several other tourists exchanged uncomfortable glances. A young couple from Australia whispered to each other, commenting on how rude some people could be. Marcus remained perfectly still through all of this. His training had prepared him for difficult situations. He had stood in rain, snow, and blazing heat. He had endured people making jokes, trying to make him laugh, or getting too close. But something about this moment felt different. It was not just the ice cream on the ground near his boots. It was the complete lack of respect, the entitlement, the way Karen treated everyone around her as if they were invisible or beneath her. Karen finally finished her ice cream cone and looked around for a trash bin. The nearest one was about 20 feet away, clearly visible with a bright blue recycling symbol on it. But Karen decided 20 feet was too far to walk. She looked down at the sticky napkins in her hand, the empty cone wrapper, the plastic spoon she had grabbed from the ice cream vendor. Then she looked at Marcus, standing perfectly still in his uniform. And a terrible idea formed in her mind. Without any hesitation, without any shame, Karen casually tossed her trash directly at Marcus's feet. The napkins fluttered down, landing on his boots. The wrapper bounced off his leg. The plastic spoon clattered on the cobblestones. She did not even try to hide what she had done. She simply turned to Tom and announced she was ready to see the changing of the guard. Ceremony, the crowd around them went silent. Several tourists gasped. A teenager with a video camera had been filming the palace and had accidentally caught the entire incident. The elderly Japanese woman covered her mouth in shock. The Australian couple stared in disbelief. Even Karen's own children looked horrified. Though they had long ago learned that their mother was capable of almost anything, Marcus felt his jaw tighten slightly. The only physical reaction he allowed himself. Inside, emotions swirled. Anger, frustration, sadness, at being treated like an object rather than a person. But his training held firm. He did not move. He did not speak. He remained the perfect guardian, even as trash lay scattered at his feet. Even as this woman walked away laughing, Tom looked back at Marcus with an apologetic expression. But he did not have the courage to stand up to his wife. He never did. Sophie pulled out her phone, probably texting her friends about how embarrassing her mother was. Jake walked faster, trying to put distance between himself and the scene. A palace security officer who had witnessed everything began walking toward the area. His face serious. Other guards who were stationed nearby had also seen what happened. Palace staff members exchanged looks. This was not going to be ignored. Karen had crossed a line that tourists were never supposed to cross, treating a royal guard with such blatant disrespect. But Karen did not notice any of this. She was already planning her next photo opportunity, already thinking about where to have lunch, already forgetting about the mess she had created and the man she had disrespected. She had no idea that her actions had been noticed by more than just shocked tourists. She had no idea that consequences were coming. Captain Elizabeth Morrison had been overseeing palace security for 15 years. She was a stern woman, with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun. She commanded respect from everyone who worked under her. She had seen many incidents over the years, from tourists trying to climb the palace gates to protesters causing disturbances. But when her radio crackled with a report about someone throwing trash at one of her guards, her expression darkened immediately. She arrived at Marcus's post within minutes, her polished shoes clicking sharply against the cobblestones. She assessed the situation quickly, noting the trash scattered near Marcus's feet, the uncomfortable crowd of tourists, and Karen's figure in the distance. Still oblivious to the trouble she had created, Captain Morrison spoke briefly to Marcus in a low voice, asking if he was all right. Marcus gave the slightest nod, the only response he could give while on duty. The captain then turned to her team and began issuing quiet instructions. Karen had moved on to another section of the plaza, complaining loudly about how crowded the palace grounds were. She was telling Tom that they should have VIP access, that people like them should not have to wait in lines with common tourists. Tom was nodding absently, having learned long ago that agreeing with his wife was easier than arguing. Sophie and Jake had separated themselves from their parents, sitting on a bench far away. Both desperately wishing they could disappear, two palace security officers approached Karen and Tom with professional courtesy. The taller one, Officer James Whitmore, addressed Karen politely but firmly. He explained that there had been an incident involving disrespectful behavior toward a royal guard and littering on palace grounds. Karen's face immediately twisted into an expression of indignant rage. She demanded to know what he was talking about, her voice rising loud enough that nearby tourists turned to watch. Officer. Whitmore remained calm and explained exactly what had been witnessed. Multiple people had seen her throw trash at the guard's feet. There were even tourists who had recorded the incident on their phones. Karen's face turned red, but not from embarrassment. She was furious at being confronted. She began arguing loudly, claiming she had done no such thing, that this was ridiculous, that she was a paying tourist and deserved better treatment. Tom tried to intervene quietly, suggesting they just apologize and move on, but Karen shot him such a fierce look that he stepped back immediately. She turned her anger back on the security officers, demanding to speak to their supervisor, threatening to call the American embassy, insisting she knew important people who would hear about this treatment. Captain Morrison stepped forward then, introducing herself calmly but with unmistakable authority. She informed Karen that disrespecting royal guards was taken very seriously. Ass was littering on protected historical grounds. There were clearly posted rules that all visitors were expected to follow. Karen tried to interrupt, but the captain continued speaking, her voice cutting through Karen's protests like a knife through butter. The captain explained that Karen had 3 options. First, she could be escorted off the palace grounds immediately and banned from returning. Second, she could be issued a formal citation with a fine that could reach several £100s. Or third, she could properly clean up the mess she had made, apologize to the guard she had disrespected, and agree to follow all posted rules for the remainder of her visit. The choice was entirely hers. Karen stared at Captain Morrison in disbelief. Her mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. She looked around at the crowd of tourists who were all watching this drama unfold. Some had their phones out, clearly recording. The teenager who had accidentally filmed her throwing the trash was standing nearby, his camera still running. Karen realized with growing horror that this moment was being captured for the entire internet to see. She tried one more time to argue her way out of it.
Ow.
Her voice somewhat less confident now. She claimed she had not realized what she was doing, that it was an accident, that surely they could just forget about this whole thing. But Captain Morrison's expression remained unchanged. The rules were the rules, and they applied to everyone equally. Regardless of where they came from or how important they thought they were, Tom finally found his voice and quietly suggested to Karen that she should just clean up the trash. He'd apologize. It was not worth the hassle, not worth getting banned, not worth whatever fine they might impose. Sophie and Jake had noticed the commotion and drifted closer, their faces pale with embarrassment. Sophie whispered urgently to her mother to just do what they asked so they could leave. Karen looked around desperately, hoping for some way out of this situation. But everywhere she looked, she saw tourists watching her with judgment in their eyes. The elderly Japanese woman she had been rude to earlier stood nearby, her expression disappointed rather than angry. The Australian couple was filming on their phone. A group of British teenagers were whispering and laughing. Karen realized that there was no escape. No way to talk herself out of this corner she had backed into. With her face burning with humiliation and anger, Karen finally agreed through gritted teeth to clean up the mess. Officer Whitmore handed her a pair of disposable gloves and a small trash bag. Karen stared at them as if they were covered in poison. She had never cleaned up anything in a public place in her entire life. She had people who did that sort of thing for her. The idea of bending down in front of all these strangers, of picking up trash she had thrown, was almost unbearable. But the alternative was worse. Being banned from the palace, getting a fine that would show up on their credit card statement, having Tom remind her of this incident for years to come. With shaking hands, Karen pulled on the gloves. They were cheap plastic ones, the kind that always tore easily, and she struggled to get them on properly. Tom offered to help, but she snapped at him to stay back. The walk back to Marcus's post felt like the longest walk of Karen's life. Every step was heavy with humiliation. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her back. She could hear whispers and giggles from the crowd. Someone said something in French that she did not understand, but the laughter that followed made it clear they were mocking her. A small child asked his mother loudly why that lady was in trouble, and the mother's explanation carried clearly in the morning air. Marcus remained in position, still perfectly still staring straight ahead. The trash was exactly where Karen had left it. The napkins now slightly moved by a gentle breeze, the wrapper catching sunlight. The plastic spoon a stark white against the gray cobblestones. Captain Morrison followed Karen, along with Officer Whitmore, making sure she completed her task. Several other tourists had gathered closer, creating a semicircle of witnesses to Karen's comeuppance. Karen stood there for a moment, staring down at the trash, hoping for a miracle that would save her from this humiliation. But no miracle came. Captain Morrison cleared her throat meaningfully. Karen had no choice left. She had created this mess with her entitlement and disrespect, and now she would literally clean it up. She bent down slowly, her expensive clothes suddenly feeling ridiculous. her perfect hair falling forward around her face. As she reached for the first piece of trash she had so carelessly thrown at a man who had done nothing to deserve such treatment. Karen's fingers trembled as she picked up the first sticky napkin from the ground. The chocolate ice cream had left brown stains on the paper, and the texture made her stomach turn. She had always been disgusted by messes, which was ironic considering she had just created one deliberately. She dropped the napkin into the trash bag quickly, as if touching it any longer might contaminate her permanently. Next came the plastic spoon. It had fallen between two cobblestones and required her to bend down even lower to retrieve it. Her knees protested. She was not used to bending or kneeling or doing any kind of physical work. At home, she had a housekeeper who handled everything. At restaurants, servers cleaned up after her. In her entire life, she had never had to pick up her own trash in public, while dozens of strangers watched and judged. The wrapper was the worst. It had landed partially on Marcus's boot, and Karen would have to actually touch his uniform to retrieve it. She hesitated, her hand hovering in the air, unwilling to complete this final act of humiliation. Captain Morrison's voice came from behind her, patient but firm, reminding her that she needed to clean everything completely. There could be no half measures, no incomplete jobs. Karen felt tears of frustration building behind her eyes. But she refused to cry in front of these people. She carefully pinched the corner of the wrapper between two gloved fingers and pulled it away from Marcus's boot. As she did, she accidentally looked up at his face for the first time. She had expected to see triumph there, or smugness, or anger. But Marcus's expression remained neutral, professional, focused on the distance. He was not looking at her. He was not gloating. He was simply doing his job, standing guard, maintaining his dignity despite everything she had put him through. Something twisted uncomfortably in Karen's chest. It was a feeling she rarely experienced and did not particularly like. It might have been shame, actual genuine shame, though she would never admit it out loud. For just a moment, she saw Marcus not as a prop for her photos or a target for her carelessness, but as a real person. A person with a job to do, a person who deserved respect. A person she had treated terribly for no reason other than her own convenience and sense of superiority. Karen stood up slowly, her back aching from the unfamiliar position. She held the trash bag in one hand, the gloves still on, feeling more exposed and vulnerable than she had felt in years. The crowd around her had grown larger. What had started as a few dozen witnesses was now at least 100 people, all watching the entitled American woman learn a lesson in humility. Several phones were still recording, capturing every moment of her disgrace. Captain Morrison stepped forward and examined the area carefully, making sure every piece of trash had been collected. Satisfied, she nodded, and then turned to Karen with an expectant expression. Karen looked confused for a moment until the captain reminded her that there was a second part to the agreement. She needed to apologize to the guard she had disrespected. The words needed to be sincere, and they needed to be said clearly enough for the gathered crowd to hear. Karen's face flushed red again. Apologizing was something she rarely did, even to her own family. The idea of apologizing to this guard, in front of all these people, while cameras recorded everything, felt impossible. She opened her mouth to protest, to argue that cleaning up the trash should be enough. But Captain Morrison's expression stopped her cold. This was not a negotiation. This was a requirement. If she refused, the other consequences would immediately take effect. Tom was standing nearby, looking more uncomfortable than Karen had ever seen him. For once, he was not just passively going along with whatever Karen wanted. His expression showed disappointment, maybe even a hint of shame at being associated with her behavior. Sophie had her face buried in her hands, and Jake had turned completely away, unable to watch his mother's humiliation any longer. Karen took a deep breath and turned to face Marcus. She tried to speak, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. Captain Morrison asked her firmly to speak up so that everyone could hear. Karen swallowed hard and tried again, her voice stronger this time, but shaking with emotion. She said she was sorry for throwing trash at his feet, that it was disrespectful and wrong, and that she should not have done it. The words felt like broken glass in her throat. Each syllable hurt to speak, not because they were physically difficult, but because they represented everything Karen tried never to be: wrong, humbled, accountable. She had spent her entire adult life believing she was above consequences, that her money and confidence could carry her through any situation. But standing here in front of Buckingham Palace, forced to apologize to a man whose name she did not even know, she realized how hollow that belief had been. Marcus, for his part, maintained his professional composure. He did not acknowledge her apology with words or gestures, as was protocol while on duty. But something in his eyes shifted slightly. A brief flicker of acknowledgement that he had heard her, that her words had registered. It was not forgiveness exactly, but it was recognition. He remained standing tall, dignified. Having endured this entire ordeal with the grace and professionalism his position demanded, Captain Morrison accepted Karen's apology on behalf of the Royal Guard and reminded her that all visitors to palace grounds were expected to follow posted rules and treat staff with respect. She warned that if Karen caused any further incidents during her stay in London, she would be banned from all royal properties immediately and without appeal. Karen nodded quickly, eager to have this nightmare end. Eager to escape the stares and whispers and cameras, Officer Whitmore collected the trash bag and gloves from Karen, disposing of them in a proper receptacle. He then handed Karen a printed copy of the palace rules and regulations. Highlighting the sections about visitor conduct and littering penalties, he suggested she read them carefully before her next visit to any historical site. Karen took the papers with shaking hands. Folding them quickly and stuffing them into her expensive handbag, the crowd began to slowly disperse. Though many tourists lingered to watch what would happen next, some were clearly disappointed that the drama had ended so quickly. Others looked satisfied that justice had been served. The elderly Japanese woman gave a small, approving nod before walking away with her tour group. The Australian couple was already uploading their video to social media, captioning it with hashtags about entitled tourists and instant karma. Tom approached Karen cautiously and suggested quietly that they leave the palace grounds and go back to their hotel. For once, Karen did not argue. She wanted nothing more than to escape this place, to hide from the judgmental eyes and the recording cameras. She wanted to forget this morning had ever happened, though she knew that would be impossible. Her own children had witnessed her humiliation. Her husband had seen her forced to back down. And somewhere on the internet, videos of this incident were probably already going viral. Sophie and Jake joined their parents silently. The family began walking toward the exit. Karen's designer shoes clicked against the cobblestones, but now the sound seemed hollow rather than confident. Her perfect hair was slightly disheveled from bending down. Her expensive outfit felt ridiculous rather than impressive. Everything about her carefully constructed image had been stripped away by one thoughtless action and its very public consequences as they walked. Karen could not resist one final glance back at Marcus. He remained at his post, standing tall and proud, rifle at his side, eyes forward. The trash was gone. The crowd had mostly moved on to other attractions. It was as if the incident had never happened, at least from his perspective. He had endured, maintained his composure, and emerged from the situation with his dignity intact. Karen could not say the same for herself. The taxi ride back to the hotel was painfully silent. Tom sat in the front passenger seat, staring out the window at London streets passing by. Sophie and Jake were squeezed into the back seat with their mother, both of them as far away from her as the small space would allow. Karen sat in the middle, her arms crossed tightly, her jaw clenched, trying desperately to hold together the pieces of her shattered pride. Nobody spoke. The taxi driver occasionally glanced in his rearview mirror, sensing the tension but wisely choosing not to comment. The radio played soft music that nobody listened to. Outside, London continued its busy day, completely unaware and uncaring about one American tourist's public humiliation. Life moved on, as it always did, regardless of individual embarrassment. When they arrived at the hotel, a boutique 5-star establishment that Karen had insisted on despite the cost, Tom paid the driver quickly. The family walked through the elegant lobby with its crystal chandeliers and marble floors. Karen usually loved making an entrance in places like this, loved having people notice her expensive clothes and confident stride. But today, she rushed toward the elevator with her head down. desperate to reach the privacy of their room before anyone recognized her. Once inside their suite, Sophie immediately retreated to the bedroom she shared with her brother, slamming the door behind her. Jake followed without a word. Tom went to the minibar and poured himself a drink, something he rarely did before dinner time. Karen stood in the middle of the living area, still wearing her designer sunglasses inside, still trying to maintain some illusion of control. Finally, Tom broke the silence. His voice was quiet but firm in a way Karen had not heard in years. He told her that what happened today was unacceptable, that her behavior had been embarrassing not just for her but for their entire family. He said that Sophie and Jake were old enough to understand what their mother had done, and they were humiliated. He admitted that he was humiliated too, tired of always making excuses for her rudeness. Tired of watching her treat people as if they were beneath her, Karen removed her sunglasses and stared at her husband in shock. Tom never spoke to her like this. Tom always backed down, always agreed with her, always let her have her way to avoid conflict. But something had changed today. Maybe watching his wife being forced to pick up trash in front of hundreds of strangers had finally broken through his usual passivity. Maybe he had finally reached his limit. She tried to defend herself, her voice rising. She claimed she had been humiliated enough already and did not need a lecture from him. She insisted she had made a small mistake and that everyone was overreacting. But even as the words left her mouth, they sounded hollow. She knew what she had done was not a small mistake. Throwing trash at another human being, treating a guard like he was invisible, refusing to take responsibility until she was forced to face consequences. These were not small mistakes. These were character flaws. Tom listened to her excuses, then quietly said something that cut deeper than anything else that day. He told her that their children were ashamed of her, that they often told their friends their mother was working or busy. When she wanted to attend school events because they did not want her there, they were embarrassed by how she treated waiters and store clerks and anyone she considered below her social status. Today was not an isolated incident. It was just the first time she had faced real consequences for behavior that had been ongoing for years. Karen felt like she had been slapped. She wanted to argue, to defend herself, to claim her children loved having her involved in their lives. But she could not, because deep down, she knew Tom was telling the truth. She had noticed the way Sophie rolled her eyes when Karen complained to restaurant managers. She had seen Jake pretend not to know her when she argued loudly with customer service representatives. She had dismissed these reactions as teenage embarrassment. Never considering that maybe she was the problem, Tom finished his drink and set the glass down carefully. He told Karen that he was taking Sophie and Jake to the British Museum for the afternoon, that they needed some space from her. He suggested she use the time to think about how she treated people and whether that was really who she wanted to be. Then he walked to the bedroom door, knocked gently, and told their children to get ready to go out. Karen was left alone in the hotel suite, surrounded by luxury that suddenly felt empty and meaningless. She walked to the window and looked out at London below. Tourists were everywhere, taking photos, enjoying their vacations, treating each other with basic courtesy and respect. Things that apparently were too difficult for her to manage. She pulled out her phone, intending to distract herself with social media. But that turned out to be a terrible mistake. The incident at the palace was already circulating online. The teenager's video had been shared thousands of times with captions like entitled "Tourist Gets exactly what she deserves, and instant karma at Buckingham Palace." Karen watched the video with growing horror. Seeing herself from an outside perspective for the first time, she looked awful. Not just physically, though her angry red face was certainly unflattering, but her behavior, her body language, her complete disregard for everyone around her. She looked like a caricature of everything wrong with privileged tourists. She looked like exactly the kind of person she had always claimed to dislike. The comments below the video were brutal, but not entirely wrong. People called her selfish, entitled, disrespectful. They praised the palace security for not letting her get away with such behavior. Karen closed the social media app quickly, feeling sick to her stomach, but the damage was done. She could not unsee what she had seen, could not unhear what she had heard. For years, she had moved through the world believing she was confident and assertive. that she knew how to get what she wanted and refused to let anyone push her around. But watching that video, she realized how others saw her. Not as confident, but as aggressive. Not as assertive, but as rude. Not as someone who knew their worth, but as someone who had forgotten that other people had worth too. She thought about Marcus, standing there in his uniform, doing his job with dignity and professionalism. Despite her disrespect, she thought about the elderly Japanese woman she had snapped at, who had only asked politely to share the space. She thought about countless waiters and hotel staff and store employees she had treated as inconveniences rather than human beings. The memories came flooding back, incident after incident that she had dismissed at the time but now seemed shameful and cruel. Karen sat down heavily on the expensive sofa and, for the first time in longer than she could remember, she cried. Not tears of frustration or anger like earlier, but tears of genuine remorse and shame. She cried for the person she had become, for the family she had alienated with her behavior, for all the people she had hurt with her casual cruelty and thoughtless entitlement. When the tears finally stopped, Karen felt exhausted but also strangely lighter. The wall she had built around herself, the armor of arrogance and superiority she had worn for so long, had cracked. And through that crack, reality had come pouring in. She did not like what she saw in that reality, but at least she was finally seeing it clearly. She picked up her phone again, and instead of checking social media, she opened her messages. She sent a text to Sophie and Jake, telling them she was sorry for embarrassing them today and many other times before. She told them she loved them and wanted to be a better mother. Then she sent a message to Tom, thanking him for being honest with her, even though it was difficult to hear. The responses did not come immediately. Karen did not expect them to. Her family needed time and space to process everything that had happened, but she had taken a first small step toward change, and that was something. She thought about Marcus again, about the quiet dignity he had maintained even when she was at her worst. If he could stand there with such grace under pressure, surely she could find the strength to become a better person. Karen spent the rest of the afternoon alone in that hotel suite. Truly alone with herself for perhaps the first time in years, she thought about her life, her choices, her behavior. She thought about who she had been and who she wanted to become. The road ahead would not be easy. Changing deep patterns of behavior never was. But the alternative, continuing to be the person in that viral video, person her own children were ashamed of, was no longer acceptable. Tom, Sophie, and Jake returned to their London hotel in the late afternoon after a peaceful day visiting the British Museum, walking through Covent Garden and enjoying afternoon tea. The absence of Karen's constant complaints had created a rare calm among them. When they entered the suite, they found her sitting quietly on the sofa with her laptop, striking difference from her usual rigid demeanor. Her face was bare of makeup, her eyes red from crying, and her posture noticeably softer. She asked them to sit down because she wanted to talk. Karen began speaking with an unusually soft and uncertain voice. She offered a genuine apology, not the quick dismissive kind used to end arguments, a real one rooted in humility and emotion. She apologized for embarrassing them that day and countless times before, for treating service workers with disrespect, and for teaching her children through example that some people were worth less than others. She admitted that watching the video of her incident with the Royal Guard had forced her to see herself as others perceived her, and she was ashamed of that person. Sophie looked shocked, never having heard her mother apologize with such genuine emotion. Jake appeared skeptical, waiting for the catch. Karen continued, explaining how she had spent the afternoon alone, reflecting on her life. She admitted that her arrogance and entitlement had been hiding a deep fear of insignificance. Without designer clothes and a demanding attitude, she feared she would simply disappear. She had confused being loud with being important and getting her way with being respected. Today had shown her how profoundly wrong she had been. Tom finally moved from the doorway and sat with his children, his expression cautious but softer. He acknowledged her apology and honesty, but made clear that words alone were insufficient. If she truly wanted to change, she would need to prove it through consistent actions over time. One apology could not erase years of difficult behavior. Karen accepted this. understanding that she could not expect immediate forgiveness or trust. She said she would need to earn that trust back through her choices. She revealed that she had spent part of the afternoon researching volunteer opportunities back home and organizations that helped people in need, where she could learn to serve others instead of expecting everyone to serve her. Sophie spoke for the first time, her voice quiet but firm. She said she wanted to believe her mother could change but was afraid to hope, having been disappointed so many times before. She confessed feeling ashamed when her friends talked about their kind and supportive mothers, contrasting them with her own angry and critical parent. Her words clearly hurt Karen, but she listened without interrupting or defending herself. Jake added that he was tired of watching his mother yell at people over minor mistakes, tired of seeing her treat service workers disrespectfully, and tired of always preparing for her to cause a scene. He revealed that some school friends had seen the video online and sent him messages about it. He had been too humiliated to respond. Karen felt tears building but fought them back. This conversation was not about her feelings or pain. It was about listening to how her actions had affected the people she loved most. She needed to hear these hard truths even when they hurt, to fully understand the impact of her behavior and genuinely commit to changing it. The family talked for over an hour, their longest honest conversation in years. Sophie and Jake shared specific memories of times they had been embarrassed by their mother's behavior. Tom discussed how exhausting it was constantly apologizing to people on her behalf and smoothing over conflicts she created. Karen listened to everything without making excuses, deflecting blame, or playing the victim. It was difficult, perhaps the most challenging conversation she had ever experienced, but necessary. As evening approached, Tom suggested ordering room service for dinner instead of going out. Nobody objected. The thought of facing public spaces and possible recognition from the viral video was overwhelming for everyone. Karen called room service, and Tom noticed how differently she spoke to the staff. Her voice was polite rather than demanding. She said please and thank you, asking if the order would be difficult rather than simply expecting immediate service. When the food arrived, Karen thanked the server genuinely and handed him a generous tip with a smile. The young man looked surprised but pleased. After he left, Jake commented quietly that his mother had never tipped room service before. Karen admitted he was right, acknowledging it was one of many small cruelties she had never considered until now. They ate together, the atmosphere noticeably different from the morning despite remaining somewhat tense. Sophie asked what they should do with their remaining vacation days. Karen surprised everyone by suggesting they ask the hotel concierge for recommendations about community service opportunities or local charities. She wanted to see a different side of London and meet people making positive differences in the world. Tom studied her carefully, trying to determine if this was genuine or another performance. Something in her expression convinced him she meant it. This was not the woman who had thrown trash at a royal guard that morning. Something fundamental had shifted within her. Whether it would last remained uncertain. But the change seemed real. The next morning, Karen woke early and went to the hotel gym, something she had never done during a vacation. Not to maintain her appearance for social media, but to think. While walking on the treadmill, she thought about Marcus, the guard. She wondered if he had finished his shift, gone home to tell family about the rude American tourist. She wondered if such incidents were common or if she had been particularly awful. An idea formed in her mind. It was probably foolish and might not be possible. But she could not shake the feeling that her public apology had been incomplete. She had said the words because she had to, not because she meant them. Now, after reflection and honest conversation with her family, she felt different. She wanted to apologize again properly, without an audience or coercion after breakfast. Karen approached Harold, the hotel concierge, asking how to send a letter to a specific royal guard at Buckingham Palace. He explained that letters could be sent through official channels, though they could not guarantee reaching a specific individual. Karen asked for stationery and an envelope. Back in her room, Karen stared at blank paper for a long time. Writing had never been her strength. She filled space with presence and voice, not careful thought. But this required something different. She picked up the pen and began to write. She wrote about what had happened without excuses, about her afternoon of reflection, about her family's honesty, opening her eyes to patterns she had been blind to for years. She wrote about watching the video and seeing herself through others' eyes, about the shame and regret. She wrote about her commitment to genuine change, not because she had been caught, but because she genuinely wanted to become better. She thanked Marcus for his dignity and professionalism despite her disrespect. She acknowledged he had every right to anger, but had maintained composure with grace. She told him his example had taught her more about true strength than any lecture. She apologized genuinely, not from obligation, but from sincere regret. The letter ran to pages, honest though imperfect, signed simply with her first name and date. She took it to Harold, who accepted it with a kind smile, promising to send it through appropriate channels. He told her it was admirable to take responsibility and seek to make amends. Over the following days, the family explored London differently. Instead of luxury shopping and exclusive restaurants, they visited museums and parks, attended a community event at a local church where volunteers served meals to homeless people. Karen helped serve food, listened to stories, began understanding how privileged her life had been and how little she had appreciated it. 3 months after returning from London, Karen stood in the community center kitchen preparing sandwiches for the weekly food distribution program. Her hands moved efficiently, having learned the routine over 2 months of volunteering. Next to her, Dorothy hummed softly while wrapping sandwiches. They worked in comfortable silence. Something Karen had learned to appreciate after years of filling every moment with her own voice. The changes had not happened overnight. The first weeks after London were difficult. Old habits were hard to break, and she caught herself snapping at baristas or complaining too loudly more than once. But each time, she stopped, apologized, and tried again. Sophie and Jake watched these efforts with cautious optimism. Tom remained supportive, but careful, waiting to see if the changes would stick. The viral video had faded from social media, replaced by newer scandals. But Karen had not forgotten it. She kept a screenshot on her phone as a reminder of who she never wanted to be again. When she felt the old entitlement rising, when she caught herself about to treat someone dismissively, she would remember that moment of forced accountability in front of Buckingham Palace. Her relationship with her children slowly began to heal. Sophie had invited her to a school event last month, something she had not done in years. Karen attended and simply watched and supported without trying to take over or criticize. Afterward, Sophie hugged her and whispered that she was proud of her mom. Those words meant more than any compliment about appearance or possessions ever had. Jake started talking to her again about his interests and friends. He told her about struggling with math class. Instead of lecturing him about effort and excellence, Karen listened and helped him find a tutor. She was learning that being a good parent meant supporting her children in their own journeys rather than pushing them toward her vision of success. Tom had noticed the changes too. Their marriage, strained for years beneath polite cooperation, was gradually improving. They had started actually talking again, sharing thoughts and feelings instead of just coordinating schedules. Tom admitted he had been considering separation before the London trip, unable to continue living with the person Karen had become. Hearing this was painful, but clarifying. She had come closer to losing everything than she realized. Dorothy commented that Karen seemed happier lately, more at peace. Karen paused and considered this. She was happier, though not in the way she had always imagined. She had less focus on material things, less concern about what strangers thought of her appearance, less need to dominate every situation. Instead, she found satisfaction in small moments of genuine connection, in helping others. In being present for her family, the volunteer coordinator announced that people were arriving for meal service. Karen moved to the serving area. She had been nervous the first time serving food here, worried about saying the wrong thing or not knowing how to interact with people whose lives were so different from hers. But she learned that people were just people, regardless of circumstances, and they deserved respect and dignity. An elderly man came through the line, and Karen served him with a smile, asking how his day was going. He told her about the warm weather and a kind bus driver. Karen listened genuinely, not performing kindness, but actually caring. When he thanked her and moved on, She felt a sense of purpose that designer handbags and exclusive restaurants had never provided. After cleanup, Karen checked her phone to find a message from Tom asking what time she would be home and if she wanted to watch a movie that evening. Simple domestic plans, but they felt meaningful in a way grand gestures never had. Driving home. Karen thought about the letter she had sent to Marcus 3 months ago. She never received a response and did not expect one. The letter had not been about getting closure or recognition for her attempt to make amends. It had been about taking responsibility and expressing genuine remorse. Whether Marcus ever read it or not, writing it had been an important step toward becoming a better person. She wondered sometimes what Marcus would think if he could see her now. Volunteering at a community center, working to repair relationships with her family, trying to treat everyone with respect. Would he believe the change was real? The changes she was making were not for him or anyone else. They were for herself, for the person she wanted to be, for the legacy she wanted to leave with her children. When Karen arrived home, Sophie was doing homework at the kitchen table. She looked up and smiled, telling her mom that dinner was already started because Jake had decided to try cooking. Karen felt warmth spread through her chest. Her children were comfortable enough at home now to take initiative, to help out, to be themselves. That was something her old behavior had nearly destroyed. Jake appeared from the kitchen wearing an apron, looking proud despite flour smudges on his face. He announced he was making pasta from scratch and that it might not be perfect, but he had followed the recipe carefully. Karen resisted the urge to take over or criticize. Instead, she asked if she could help, and followed his instructions. Letting him lead the process, Tom arrived home from work and found his family working together in the kitchen. Laughing about Jake's ambitious cooking project, he joined in, and for a while, they simply existed together as a family without conflict or tension. These moments had become more common over the past few months, but they still felt precious and somewhat fragile. Over dinner, which turned out better than Jake had feared, Sophie mentioned that her school was organizing a charity fundraiser and asked if the family might participate together. Karen agreed immediately, and they spent the meal planning how they could contribute. It felt natural to discuss helping others. The old Karen would have found excuses or turned it into something about her own image. The new Karen was genuinely excited to be part of something meaningful with her family. After dinner, while cleaning the kitchen together, Tom told her quietly that he was proud of the work she was doing to change. He admitted he had doubted whether it would last. But seeing her consistent efforts over these months had restored his faith in their marriage and their future. Karen felt tears prick her eyes, good tears this time. Tears of gratitude and hope rather than shame and regret. That night, lying in bed with Tom already asleep, Karen thought about her journey over the past 3 months. From the entitled tourist throwing trash at a guard, to the humiliated woman forced to clean her own mess, to the person she was becoming now. It had not been easy. There were still days when she struggled, when old patterns tried to reassert themselves. But she kept trying, kept choosing differently, kept remembering that moment in London when she had finally seen herself clearly. She thought about Marcus one final time before sleep claimed her. She hoped he was well, that his life was filled with people who treated him with respect. She hoped that if he had received her letter, it had meant something to him. But mostly, she hoped he had forgotten about her entirely. That the incident had faded into just another strange day at work. Karen knew she would never be perfect. She would make mistakes, would sometimes fall back into old behaviors, would struggle with being a better person. But she was committed to the journey now. It's not because she had been caught and punished, but because she finally understood what truly mattered. Not designer clothes or social media likes or getting her own way. What mattered was kindness, respect, genuine connection, and the love of the people who knew her best. The viral video still existed somewhere on the internet, permanent record of her worst moment. But Karen had made peace with that. She could not erase the past or undo the harm she had caused. All she could do was learn from it, grow beyond it, and work every day to be someone her family could be proud of. As sleep finally came, Karen's last conscious thought was simple. She was grateful. Grateful for the consequences that had forced her to look at herself honestly. Grateful for a family who had given her another chance. Grateful for the opportunity to change, to grow, to become the person she should have been all along. Tomorrow, she would wake up and continue that work, one choice at a time, building a life based on respect and kindness rather than entitlement and superiority.